Still good.
Always. Welcome back to Liberty on the Rocks on the Think Liberty Network, and I'm your host, William Gaston. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Thomas Kilroy. Tom, how are you?
Doing okay, man.
Outstanding. So first things first, as usual, our scotch of this particular episode is, again, the Dalmore 12. Always delicious. Always tastes like smoked maple syrup, which tastes a lot better than it sounds. Anyway, so this episode we're going to be finishing up our series on the constitutional amendments, and this will also be our second and last episode of the Fight for Your Rights campaign in August. Now, you might be noticing that we both went sans suits once again, and that's a clear indication that none of you are buying nearly enough t-shirts. So go ahead and check out our merchandise store on our Facebook page at Think Liberty, or the merch store on think-liberty.com, or our new store on Amazon that's got some of our latest shirts. Actually, we just released 2 this week.
Oh, nice.
I'm not exactly sure when this is going to air, which shirt of the week will be up at that point.
Yeah.
But look for the shirt of the week on our Amazon store. The shirt of the week will always be $15, but only for that week, and then it's going to rotate to a new one. But the 2 new ones we have our Fight for Your Rights t-shirt, courtesy of this campaign. And we also have the Debate is Over, featuring Cody Wilson's Liberator handgun. So also both of them with Vinny's signature design. So go ahead and check that on the Amazon store, and maybe we can buy some more suits. And really, isn't that what's important here?
Yes.
Okay. So let's dive on in, man. So last time we talked about the First, the Second, the Third, and the Fourth Amendments. We talked about the historical context behind them, and of course why they're important, why they were important at the time, and why they're still important today. But perhaps most importantly, why it's important for people to understand what those rights are and how they can exercise them in order to preserve them. So we'll start with the Fifth Amendment. It says that no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. There's a lot of stuff right there. So let's go ahead and take this line by line, because this is a really meaty amendment.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
It's great stuff, but I mean, it is very dense. So one thing I want to say before we really get into these amendments is I think the 5th through 10th amendments are by far the most overlooked. The First Amendment, sexy. The Second Amendment, dangerous. Like, it's cool. Sorry, you're gonna have to edit that out.
Okay.
It's cool, man. People want to get into guns. People love having their voices heard. Third Amendment, yeah, it's all right. Fourth Amendment, that's when we start kind of going downhill a little bit. It's not fun to learn about those, but it's important. So let's try to make this as fun as we can. But let's break this down line by line. So it says, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land and naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. So basically what that's saying is an individual can't be forced to represent themselves unless they are in the military. So in the modern context, basically what that says, in the military, while you are in military service, you are held under a totally separate set of rules and laws, for lack of a better word. So when I was in the military, we did and still do go by the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So most of these laws run parallel to civilian law. Don't drink and drive. Don't sexually assault people. Don't assault anyone otherwise. Really basic stuff. Don't steal people's things. But the difference is, because you're in military service, you fall under a totally separate set of punishments as well. So if someone were to drink and drive, for example, they would go through the civilian process first, go under whatever punishments they have, have your license revoked, what have you. Then your ass is the military's. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to hit you a lot harder than the civilian side did. And you get both. So, military members are held to a higher standard, this and that, blah, blah, blah. But there are also a lot of rules in the UCMJ that don't apply to civilians. For example, adultery is punishable under the UCMJ. Certain... I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but anyway, basically, this is saying that you can't be forced into a position more than the average civilian unless you are under contractual obligation to the military, the militia, etc. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. So this is where we get into the whole double jeopardy thing.
Yeah, it was a very interesting movie. If you've seen that.
Absolutely. Was that who's the main guy in that? Was that Michael Douglas?
I'm not gonna act like I know. I wanted to say Connery, but I have no idea.
It was one of those old dudes. But anyway, Drew. Anyway, Tom, what's your understanding of double jeopardy?
So, at least I'm sure it's the same in reality, but in the movie, someone is convicted of murdering their husband, I think, and she goes to prison, and then she gets out. And then after a while, she finds out that the guy's still alive. Spoilers, obviously. And then
30 years.
Yeah, and then goes out on the boat, and I think just takes a gun and offs him.
Wow.
And she can't go to prison because he's legally dead.
Oh, that's super intense.
Yeah,
I don't remember all of that.
Yeah,
I was probably drunk when I watched it.
Okay.
Anyway. So yeah, that's basically the extent of it, minus the whole actually murdering someone after being tried for it. So the idea is that if you commit a crime, you cannot be tried for the same crime twice unless more evidence is presented, to build the case. So O.J. Simpson is a perfect example of this. Very famous case. He was acquitted, and even though a lot of people called for a retrial, there was not enough evidence to support opening up a second trial, or else it would be unconstitutional because it would be breaching the Fifth Amendment of double jeopardy.
But also to that point, that's assuming that the person wasn't convicted. So once something has been laid down and a conviction has been issued, you're not going to get tried again for that same crime.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we like to think, but in the modern day, we'll just go ahead and take the modern aspect as we go line by line here.
Okay.
So in the modern day, you have, I believe it wasn't the Bundys. So do you recall the Bundy incident, for lack of a better term?
Yeah.
So they're the cattle farmers out in Nevada that the Bureau of Land Management came to arrest because their cattle had grazed slightly on Bureau land, and they wanted to back charge the Bundys for grazing fees to the tune of several $1 million, which obviously they didn't have, but the federal government was coming after them anyway.
Yeah.
So when BLM agents, who apparently they have their own SWAT team, I don't know why the Bureau of Land Management has a SWAT team, but we'll get to that later.
Wow, it's the same acronym. Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, but purely coincidental.
I was like, Black Lives Matter has a SWAT team?
No, I mean, I can imagine what that would look like. But, so yeah, they went to arrest the Bundys, and the Bundys had a standoff, and there ended up being hundreds of people from around the country went to the Bundy Ranch to help defend them against the encroachment of the federal government.
Right.
Just, oh man, like a baby holding an apple the whole time I was watching that thing go down. It was just great. And there was no bloodshed. So, slight rabbit trail here. That's a perfect example of civilians, regular people, coming together to defend against, like I said, federal encroachment on the individual. And there was no bloodshed. You know, as much as the mainstream media crowed about like, oh, all these militia members and these 3%ers and these oath keepers and this and that, oh, they're all just a bunch of crazies with too many guns. They were organized. They were disciplined. They set up watch rotations. Yeah. They made sure no one was going to aggress on the federal agents. And in the meantime, you had federal sharpshooters on the overpass aiming directly at these guys that were protesting peacefully.
Yeah, I'll be honest. During that whole thing, it reminded me of watching footage of Waco.
Absolutely.
I mean, because that was how it was portrayed.
Right.
And I was like, this isn't the same.
Right.
Why?
No, it's
why
not
are
the
they?
same at all.
They're vilifying these people.
Yeah, that's absolutely what happened. And I can't. That's the whole point I wanted to get you to here, but I can't recall the family members or the family name that happened almost a year after that. Very similar circumstances. Basically, this father and son cattle farmers, cattle ranchers, were having controlled burns on their property. And this is very standard practice when you live out in that part of the country. You have controlled burns so that basically if wildfire comes onto your property, they call it a break. I think a fire break.
Yeah, well, I mean that's something that I've talked with friends and family about. Why are the fires so bad in California? Obviously, it's not one variable, but one of the things is they've outlawed controlled burns in a lot of areas. So there's a bunch of underbrush that builds up over the years. If you don't have controlled burns, it's literally kindling.
It's fuel for the fire. So that's the whole point of you build these fire breaks. And then when the out-of-control wildfire hits that break, there's nothing else to burn, so it doesn't spread any further. Anyway, I digress. So this family was doing controlled burns on their property, and part of it edged into federal land. Well, now the feds want to arrest them for arson, as if it was their intent to do it. They were intending to, destroy this property, which was not the case at all.
Sure.
So basically, they went to prison for, I want to say it was a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was substantial. And they said, okay, we're going to come along quietly and we're going to serve our time. So after they had gotten out of prison, they had served their time, they had, paid their debt to society.
I figured you were going to say that.
Right, yeah. And that's a key that I'm going to get to here in a little bit. But after they had done all of these things, another judge comes around behind that and says, You haven't paid your debt to society yet. We're going to bring you back to prison to spend more time in prison after they had already served the judgment that had been cast upon them. It's totally unprecedented in U.S. law. It was totally out of hand.
So how did that not violate their Fifth Amendment rights?
Nobody called it until after the fact. So
they were in prison. Someone said, "Hey, this is a Fifth Amendment violation."
No, I don't.
They served the other term.
Oh, okay. So they were brought in, and this is after another standoff, also including the Bundys. But they were brought in for a short period of time, and they kind of sorted it out, and they were like, "No, this isn't how this works." So they were released while it was sorted out through the legal system, and then most recently, President Trump actually. Pardoned both of them. Oh. So that record is wiped from the slate. They have a clean slate. But that shouldn't have been an issue in the first place. So we already have a very clear infringement of the Fifth Amendment here. So, and I know somebody's going to be watching this and in the comments section say, "Oh, that's not the same thing. They weren't tried a second time." No, but if we're going to take this at its word, then what needs to be happening here is you got your sentence from a judge. Right. A judge that is representing.
It's funny, this is in direct contradiction to what I said earlier. Just if a conviction has come down and you serve the sentence, you can't be. I said maybe you can't be tried again.
Yeah, well, that's what they're referring to. So,
yeah, but I mean, interpretation would be there can't just be another judgment that's issued without a trial,
right?
Because that's also a violation.
Exactly. So either way you cut it, it's a clear violation.
Yeah.
So basically, they were told that they have to serve more time after judgment has already been passed for this specific crime.
Yeah.
So we already see that happening right now, and fortunately, there were enough pro bono and other law establishments that are literally created and organized for this kind of thing. So they were able to go through a very lengthy appeals process, et cetera, and luckily it eventually made its way to the president's desk, and he was pardoned. They were pardoned. So, but the fact that it happened in the first place should be terrifying to anyone that's familiar with the case. I think that about covers that line.
Yeah, no kidding.
Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. So that's pretty clear cut, right? You cannot, is it purge yourself or, well, I know there's perjury against the court, but self-incrimination, there it is. I'm not a lawyer. Come on, cut me some slack here. But so you cannot incriminate yourself. You cannot be forced to incriminate yourself unless you want to plead guilty, and that's a totally separate thing. Yeah. So basically...
At least in our lifetime, this was definitely made... famous by the Clinton-Lewinsky case, pleading the fifth all the time.
Right.
Which is essentially like you're backed into a corner, but all they have is, hey, we need you to confess right now. And you're like, I don't have to.
Right, exactly.
And that happened over and over and over again.
So, I did not have sex with that woman. Yeah. So, and that's exactly what it comes down to. So they can have everything lined up against you, but you don't have to plead guilty. That's your right.
Yeah.
Nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So again, this is incredibly key.
Yeah, so, Abraham Lincoln kind of looked over that.
Yeah, habeas corpus? We don't need that. We're at war. We're gonna have to. That's a totally separate conversation on good old Abe the Tyrant. Tyrannus, anyway.
Ends justifying means and
all kinds of
whatever
really
else he thought.
Dirty crap. But so basically what this is saying is you have to go through all the motions here. So, I mean, the cops could have walked in on you sinking the knife into your spouse or your friend or whatever. You still have the right to due process. You will still go through all of the steps of the legal system. Now, of course, this is in comparison to, say, the secret police or the redcoats or whatever dragging you out of your house in the middle of the night. And we love seeing this in pop culture, like, oh yeah, the new Bruce Willis movie's out where he's a loose cannon cop, yeah, I'm judge, jury, and executioner, and I'm bald in all of my movies now, whatever the case may be. We like watching that, but in reality, that's a horrible, horrible idea.
For sure.
That's just not how the system is supposed to work. So imagine if we had a bunch of Bruce Willises running around, doing that kind of thing to everyone. Well, being fallible human beings that we are, inevitably, and I would say most of the time, people are going to get it wrong. Especially when you put that kind of power in the hands of people that have a monopoly on power, i.e. the government. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So this is where, because it is a constitutional amendment, I do respect the Constitution, but I disagree with this particular line. I've been talking a lot. Do you want to cut in here?
Well, that brings to mind for me just eminent domain.
Exactly.
So, we're going to build an interstate here. I don't know if they actually give a market clearing price for property. Okay. Well, they give you what they assume is the value of your property, and then it's like, bye. Yeah. It reminds me of Up, where he refuses to sell his property.
Right.
But if there's a government entity that's like, no, we're going to force your hand, you're going to sell.
Yeah.
Then it happens. I mean, back where I was before, they just widened the road on this thoroughfare, and it went extremely deep into people's front yards. And it was like, well, what can they do about it? Nothing. And I don't even think they were compensated for the property. It was just, well, from the middle of the road to however far we deem necessary by the urban planners, that's just how wide the road's going to be.
Just the term urban planners makes me cringe. So basically this is... The intent of this, I believe it was for good intents, but you know what they say about, the road to hell and all that jazz. So the idea behind this was that if there's an emergency of sorts, we're at war, hey, we need to turn your house into a field hospital, or we need to, we're going to build a fort here, or whatever the case may be. The government has the right to, they can take your property, but this is the consolation prize, essentially. We're going to compensate you at fair market price or fair market value. In the modern context, as you said, with roads, with every 80s movie that involved like the community center being torn down, or being bought out by the strip mall or whatever, now the rough on the streets kids are going to learn a little bit about teamwork and stop the big bad conglomerate, whatever.
And cue the montage.
And cue the training montage with really bad 80s music. Anyway, so that's what it comes down to in the modern context. And as we alluded to a second ago, a lot of the time it's not fair market value. It's not fair prices. It's basically, we're going to take your land and we'll give you something so hopefully you shut up about it. So what a lot of people are doing to fight back against that nowadays is, again, you have organizations of lawyers, CPAs, all sorts of experts in these matters that will work for you in order to either drive the price up until the government's like, yeah, never mind, we don't want a part of this. Or they drag it through the courts long enough so that, again, hopefully the government eventually decides to F off. But, a lot of people don't understand that these organizations are out there, that they exist in the first place. More to the point, a lot of people will just say, well, I'm too small, I'm just one person, what can I do against the government? I'm just going to take their money and I'm going to go.
Well, I guess they can if they want.
They can if they want, and that is their choice. But we want them to understand that they do have other options. Another perfect example of this is during the Great Depression. Where we come from with the Tennessee Valley Authority. So you had all of these farmers that would live in these valleys, and the government said, "Yeah, you're going to have to leave your house." Yeah,
because it's going to be under it's 25 feet of water.
Right. Yeah. And if they said no, then they were forced out of their homes. And if they didn't leave, then some of them even drowned. It's just the government does have a monopoly on force, and at the time there was no recourse, but now there is. Especially in the age of the internet and all these different things, all of this information is just a few clicks away. So we are more powerful as individuals. We are more empowered to fight back against these unjust things. So it's in the Constitution, as I said. But I don't agree with it. I think it's a massive infringement upon private property rights, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed, especially when the government is taking that inch that's given to them in the amendment and taking it a mile, or however much land.
However many feet.
Exactly. Do you have anything to add to the Fifth Amendment?
No. No, there was a lot of meat there, but
yeah, it's very meaty. It's dense.
Yeah.
But we're going to get into some better stuff in here. So, the Sixth Amendment says that in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So what does this sound like?
Sounds like wherever you've committed a crime, there should be an impartial jury, which, it's funny, hastily processed bureaucracy. Anyways, people are going to be informed of the crime. They'll be vetted to where they're impartial. They're going to give a fair verdict. And then it sounds like the Miranda rights.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. If you can't provide a lawyer, one will be provided for you, and so on and so forth. So yeah, every cop show where they cut after, you have the right to remain silent.
Right.
If you choose to, and then it
fades out. I don't need the rest of them.
Right.
Or you're in 21 Jump Street and then he forgets it happens.
Which if they don't say it, then
I don't think that's a real thing.
Well, okay, if you can prove that they didn't tell you your rights, if they didn't read you your rights, if you somehow have proof, I think that can introduce doubt in the court case.
Oh, sure.
It'll lean your way. No, it's not like, oh, grounds for dismissal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, he didn't say it, so we got to let him go. That's not the thing.
Right.
But yeah. So basically, that's what this is coming into. We're getting into the judge jury kind of thing once again.
Yeah.
But so they shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. So there's two main adjectives in there. It's speedy and it's public.
Yeah, it's not going to be a kangaroo court that's in some back chambers like how they passed the Affordable Care. Anyway.
Well, one could argue that the American people were on trial at that point, and the government decided against us. Thanks, Justice John Roberts. You ass.
You could argue that.
Anyway, so a speedy and a public trial. So it's supposed to be speedy. It's not supposed to be drawn out. So whether you're guilty or you're not guilty, it is the onus is on the court or the government to make sure that you are not overly. So it's not supposed to overly inconvenience you. Well, I mean, obviously, being thrown in jail is a little bit more than an inconvenience.
Yeah.
But that's what they're going for here. Well, we don't want to drag this out. It's a cost on the taxpayer. We're keeping you from your freedom, and maybe undeservedly, but we got to figure that out. So the onus is on the government to make sure it's speedy. Well, what do you think is important about it being public, though?
Well, if it's private, you've got no guarantee of. I don't think you've got a guarantee of a fair trial. I mean, kind of with the whole idea of the Sunshine Act in modern day, what's going on? I mean, people have rights to government documents. There's no context given. It's just, woo, here it is. But if it's like from Scripture. What was made in the dark will be brought to light, and the old advice from your grandma, nothing good happens after midnight, kind of a thing. So like the same idea can be, behind closed doors, anything could happen. So if it's out in the public, I'm just going to use another saying here. Yeah. Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
I love it.
So have it out in public.
Exactly. So not only, basically the most important part of that is that it builds in accountability against the government. So if the government wants to do something shady, who's going to question it? If, they all come out of the courtroom from behind closed doors and, we found him guilty, washed our hands of that, we're done here.
Sure.
Who's to say no? So it's built-in accountability, but on top of that, it also assures the public that is watching this that they too are going to receive the same treatment if they are ever in a similar position. So it holds them accountable, and it also builds trust. So that one little word built in there holds a massive amount of importance. By an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation. So a couple of major things here. You want to break it down?
Yeah. It's going to be people that are understanding of the geographic area. It's from the same, constituents of that district. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, you're not going to put in uninformed jurors. Mm-hmm. It's not, okay, we're going to present all the facts to you right now. You were not present through any of the proceedings. So, how could they trust that it's unbiased information that's being presented to them? And then now they're supposed to issue, their verdict.
Right.
So, they're going to be fully walked through the whole proceeding. They're going to understand the area. It'll be a similar culture. To me, that kind of speaks to, the Electoral College of like having different, equal representation of a group. Where you're not just bussing in people, or what would they use, covered wagon, from the other territories or the other states,
to misrepresent.
They could swing the verdict.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what it is. This is kind of falls under the same sort of thing as a jury of your peers.
Right.
So if you live especially in a country as big as ours, if you live in one part of the country, let's say it's rural. In the South we have a very distinct culture, and even throughout the South you've got totally different cultures just a few hours away from one another.
Yeah.
Look at Cajun country versus the Carolinas, for example. So you don't want to get arrested and be brought up north, sorry Yankees, to a place where no one shares your culture, no one shares your heritage, no one understands your background, where you're coming from. Oh yeah, that guy talks funny, and he's from the South, so he's probably really dumb. You don't want that. You want a jury of your peers, people that understand you. So that can cut both ways. You know, if you actually did it, then they're going to understand more than someone else might from outside of your area how egregious that was. Or on the other hand, if you're innocent, they're going to be able to understand and accept that easier. You know, well, yeah, of course, it doesn't make sense that he would have done this thing because that's not how this guy was raised. I grew up with his parents or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's that background there that it builds in more fairness to the entire process. So, and so an impartial jury. So have you ever been on jury duty?
Surprisingly, no.
Oh, well, apparently it's your civic duty.
Yeah.
They'll arrest you. It's weird.
I've been to, I've sat in, I don't know what the audience, you know, in the back. I've seen court proceedings before, but I've never been in a jury. I've never been on trial. So
right. Well, I've never been on trial. But basically, if you get selected for jury duty, they'll ask you a series of questions, and a lot of them are very general. You know, do you have any feelings of ill will towards the U.S. government? Do you, what's your view of our justice system? These sorts of things. It'll also get very specific pertaining to the person that's on trial. It'll be something like, do you personally know this individual? It could be that, and as far out as, well, how do you feel about people that are accused of this particular crime? You know, they do a pretty decent job of looking at, will you have any inherent bias in this particular case? And if you will, for whatever reason, we're going to find somebody else. So that process ensures an impartial trial, at least as much as can be accomplished.
I don't know if you've seen it, but I watched the clip on YouTube of Last Week Tonight. John Oliver talks about prosecutors.
I haven't seen it.
And he does this whole montage of like what Sinclair Media had, which is not surprising. They're a large corporation, Sinclair Media, and they were all reading the same talking points.
Oh, I remember seeing the clip.
Yeah, so he shows news reporters over and over again, and then has a giant windowed montage where they say prosecutors will decide.
Wow.
And so he goes into basically how things can be swayed if you don't have it out in the sunlight. Which I didn't disagree with any of that. Corporations or anything without proper supervision from the market, from the public, the public related back to the government, looking, are you all corrupt? Are you doing the right thing? Are you sticking to the Constitution? Right. If you're not paying attention, who knows? And that was his point too.
At that point.
Yeah. So I guess looking back at that and watching that video, I'm sure there was slant, but it sounds like it was directly related to this amendment and how they were not sticking up to the principles that are laid out there.
Absolutely. Informed of the nature and cause of the accusation. So basically this is saying that they can't arrest you and not tell you what you're being held for or what you're being arrested for. So you have a right to understand why you were being arrested, what you're being accused of. And again, that builds accountability into the whole system. So they can't drag you out of your house, whether they be Redcoats or Stasi or KGB or whatever, secret police. You get dragged out of your home and, well, sir, what am I being arrested for? We don't have to tell you. What? It could be anything or it could be nothing. It builds more accountability into the system. Nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him. So this ties into Old Testament law, right? So in the Old Testament, I want to say in Judges, anyways, it was somewhere in there. Basically, they're laying out legal procedure that's supposed to be practiced among the Israelites. And they talk about that if someone is going to stand up and bear witness against you, then you have the right to defend yourself. Obviously not in trial by combat or something like that. Although that would make it way cooler.
Trial by combat.
Pick your champion, Tyrion. But no, not in that sense. But they have the right to face their own accusers, so they can say, well, how can you accuse me of that? What evidence are you bringing to bear against me? And I can't quote the scripture directly, but that's the essence of it.
Yeah, it's either Deuteronomy, Leviticus, or Judges. I mean, it's all...
It all kind of comes together at some point. But yeah, so that's where that comes from. It's basically saying that you can't... Again, this is accountability against the government. So, well, someone has accused you of this thing. Okay, well, who's that someone? And why would they accuse me of this thing? You know, well, we got what do you call it? An anonymous tip. You know, and you see that today a lot. Well, we got an anonymous tip. There's no accountability there.
But sometimes that's enough for a warrant.
Sometimes it is, which is egregious because that's a breach of due process right there. You know, you can't face your accuser or you can't face your witness. Like, no, that's not okay. But because we don't understand that these rights are built in, that this accountability is built in, we're just like, oh, what can we do against the government? No, I guess I'll just have to take it. No, screw that. So to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor. So what this is saying is that if you are brought to trial and someone is a witness against you and they're using the prosecution is using their witness account against you, then you can say, yeah, I want them to come to court, and they can sit in that chair and they can bear witness against me to my face.
They're compelled to testify.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's why, you know, if you're doing something shady in the movies or, you know, CSI or whatever, oh yeah, we caught her at the airport trying to flee to the Bahamas or whatever. That's where that comes from. So again, it's accountability being built into the system. Well, this way the government or whoever is accusing you can't just, like, you know, spin something out of thin air. It has to be brought to trial in front of everyone. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Pretty self-explanatory. You have the right to a lawyer. As Chris Rock said, if you can't afford a lawyer, we're going to find the dumbest motherfucker. But that's what it comes down to. So the Founding Fathers understood that not everyone is going to be as well educated as many of them were in the ways of law, you know. And they understood, and they put this in there because they understood that no one should be at a disadvantage in the courts simply because they don't know. If they're a poor farmer or a gunsmith or a blacksmith or whatever the case may be, they don't know law. So they shouldn't be just absolutely raked over the coals without having a chance to fight back under the law. Yeah. And that's exactly why they built that in there.
Well, and illiteracy rates were probably pretty bad.
Yeah.
Depending on occupation at that time.
And especially at that time. But I mean, even more so today, with all the laws we have on the books. And I mean, that's why you go to pre-law and then you go to law school after that, and it's notoriously difficult. And you have to pass the L whatever and the bar and this and that and the other, LSATs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's notoriously difficult even today. So they're not going to leave somebody high and dry just because they can't afford it or because they don't have the knowledge base. Every man deserves to have a fair shake in court. That's what it comes down to. And I think that's the best way to wrap up that whole amendment is basically everyone deserves a fair trial. Period. Dot. You shouldn't have to face any disadvantages if you're being brought to court, especially against the government, you know. Smith versus the people of whatever, you know. So the Seventh Amendment says, in suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. So this one is kind of like the Third Amendment in the way that it's not quite as applicable, but it's still important to know and understand. So this, to a certain extent, is reiterating the amendment on double jeopardy, in a sense. Yeah. It's also reiterating where it talks about right to a trial by jury, you know. So
I think if I can interject, I think. You're in the weeds. It seems like they're saying they laid out earlier that you're supposed to be tried in a certain district by people within that district. Right. So that is probably laid out because they're saying, okay, well, if you don't get a conviction, or if you do and you want to try them in another district, you can't.
Right.
You can't just say, okay, well, we want to hit him again. So let's try it in, such and such county, and go through the whole process again and again and again, move it around. It's like, nope, nip that in the bud.
Yep. Yeah, done. What do you think about the whole $20 thing? It seems kind of random.
I'm sure it's not, and I know that $20 was a lot more money.
I mean, $20 is $20, man. It's a lot of money now. I'd do a lot for $20.
Stop. I don't know. Maybe is that the legal minimum for court proceedings or something?
It might be tied into something like that, but the gist that I'm gathering from it is someone who's not a lawyer is basically, well, back then $20 was a lot of money.
Sure.
So this is saying if you have done something that's egregious enough to, let's say, your neighbor or whoever, we're all neighbors in the big picture sense.
Sure. You didn't build that.
If you cost someone else, what's that?
I said you didn't build that.
You didn't build that. So
we're all neighbors.
Yeah, won't you be my neighbor? So $20 was a lot of money back then. So if you've done something to deprive someone else of $20, then this is just recognizing that, hey man, you really screwed that guy over, or potentially did. You're accused of having screwed that guy over to that extent.
Okay.
So because of that amount of money is in play, yeah, this needs to be taken to court. This isn't something that can be hashed out outside of it.
Oh, so that was a minimum threshold then.
Right.
Okay.
That's exactly what it's saying. So the right of trial by jury, et cetera, et cetera. So it's basically saying that if it's at that level, we can't hold people below the courts responsible to take care of this thing. So it's not something that a cop is supposed to handle. If it's that level or above, it's in a totally separate category.
Okay.
So this has to go to trial. Pretty simple. So the 8th says, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. So
punishment to fit the crime.
Exactly.
Something that I think is interesting about bail, I think you get the money back when the person goes to trial.
I want to be honest with you. I have no idea how that works.
Yeah, so basically, someone commits a crime or is suspected of committing a crime, because that's how
allegedly.
That's how the American system works. Not the same in Europe. It's guilty until proven innocent, which is terrifying. But so you're in a holding up until your court date. Someone pays bond, pays bail. You get out. And that is obviously saying, in a similar fashion, the punishment should fit the crime. So right. it's relative to whatever it is, the amount of bail. If that person skips town and they don't go to trial, the government, the local entity keeps your money.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's why people pay for a bounty hunter to go and grab those people who presumably were either your friends or your family, because that's probably a high percentage of who you're bailing out.
Okay, yeah.
So you pay a bounty hunter, they get them, they bring them to court, and then you get your money back. Wow. If it's within the window. That's why bounty hunters charge a hefty fee.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Dude, what are you doing after this?
Not becoming not becoming someone who does repo or bounty hunter
ever.
It's
very
dangerous.
Props to the guys that do it, man, because somebody has to.
It's not safe.
So let's talk about the cruel and unusual punishment, because I think that's probably the thing that people focus most on in this amendment. So what do you think about that? What do you think that means?
It's kind of the punishment to fit the crime. You're not going to put someone in stocks for doing a slanderous activity. You're not going to have a bond of $1 million or $500,000 because of a petty theft or even some kind of financial federal crime. It's got to be equal. It's got to be equivalent.
Right.
I was watching a PragerU video where it talked about kind of familial killing, and it was saying, back in the Old Testament time, if if a guy murdered your daughter before the law was laid out, you could then murder the guy's daughter. Because it was like a life for a life.
Sure, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
But what that actually means is now it's the actual perpetrator.
Right.
So the guy that murdered your daughter, the punishment goes to him. Where in other cultures it was, okay, well, it's got to be equal. It's got to be his daughter. And how is that fair to that innocent life?
Right.
So that was the first precedent that was really ever laid out for equal, and obviously it's manifested itself in our Constitution.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, even Hammurabi's code, there was, surprisingly, the Babylonians had a process for removing cataracts, if you can believe it. Weirdly advanced for an ancient society or civilization. But, so there was a part built into Hammurabi's code that said if you were an eye surgeon, essentially, and you screw up the surgery, then the patient can pluck your eye out instead. So that's where you get, again, this eye for an eye mentality, literally in that case. So because it's not the victim inflicting the punishment on the perpetrator anymore, it's the government basically laying out justice for the victim. Whether or not they can carry it out themselves is irrelevant. At this point, it's elevated up to the level of the state. So they take care of that. But I think cruel and unusual punishment is really important to address because, as you said, the punishment has to fit the crime. If you steal a melon from the market, you shouldn't have your hand cut off, like it is in some
areas,
some parts of the world.
Yep.
Or cut off a family member's head because they dishonored you, as happens in some.
Please. Well, to be fair, was practice in ancient Israel to remove fingers.
Oh, sure.
For someone who is a thief.
Yeah, I mean, way back in ancient times, it was very common practice. In a lot of civilizations, in modern times, it's only common practice in one or two. I hear it's happening a lot in London now, which is weird. Anyway, so if we look at the American history of it, you've got examples of people that were held on British prisoner of war ships, like Francis Scott Keyes, the guy that wrote the Star Spangled Banner.
Scott Key, yeah.
Was it? I said Keys.
Yeah, you did.
Halo and Revolution. They just get overlapped in my head, man. Yeah, Francis Scott Key, he was held on a British prisoner of war ship, and a lot of his writings talked about how cruelly they were treated. Not only just malnourished, but beaten and everything else, all of this without a fair trial. So again, this is a clear example of the Founding Fathers having, in some cases, firsthand experience in these infringements. And that's why they believed so heartily, so fervently, that they needed to be included in the Constitution to avoid this same government that they were setting up doing that to their own people.
Yeah.
All right, so we're sitting on the 9th and the 10th Amendments. And they're the shortest, but in my opinion, they are by far among the most important amendments in all of the Constitution, not just the Bill of Rights. I cannot emphasize enough how important these two things are. So, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this, but I think it's worth it. So the 9th Amendment says that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. What does that mean to you, Tom?
This Dalmore is pretty good. I'm not really... I apologize.
It is pretty good. No, that's all right, man.
I had something else on my mind. My bad.
So, enumeration is basically speaking to kind of interpreting it in a certain way. Well, I interpret this amendment to say this or that, or I interpret this law to say this or that. So it's not black and white. It's not an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. So it's saying that if the government interprets certain rights in the Constitution, they cannot interpret those rights in such a way that they infringe on other rights. So a prime example of this would be what we're looking at with Cody Wilson right now. So he released the code for designing multiple firearms with CNC machines, with the ghost gunner, whatever the case may be. That is speech. Code is speech.
Yeah.
Hashtag code is speech is trending right now.
Is it?
So it is. From my sources in Twitter, apparently. But so that is speech. And in the same way, not only if you were to somehow curtail that, not only would you be infringing on the First Amendment, but you would also be infringing on the Second Amendment.
So is the Anarchist Cookbook illegal? Can people buy that on Amazon? Yes.
Yeah, they can.
So how is that not the same thing? Why was it ever a discussion?
Well, it shouldn't have been, and that's kind of the whole point here.
Well, okay, that's fair.
Like,
For whatever reason, I'm wanting to fixate on, we have precedent. We have things in the past that were upheld because of this amendment.
Right.
So why is it just, it's a reaction? There's really no...
Of course, it's knee-jerk reactionism.
Okay.
So with things like the Anarchist Cookbook, or even nowadays like Tom Sawyer, because there were some words in there that are seen as racist or offensive. Oh, dear God, there's something in a book that is now deemed offensive. Well, we better ban it, you know. This is like...
Because that makes readership go down when you ban a book.
Right, because people aren't going to want to read it more, you know. Well, we ban it from the library, you know. Anyway, don't want to get too much into the weeds on that. So another example of this would be if, let's say somebody says, well, we have a right to free speech, therefore we can, I don't know, invade your property in order to protest on it, something like that. I know I'm trying to pull this out of thin air, but I'm trying to find a good example of where the Ninth Amendment was breached. But basically, you can't say, well, I have this amendment, therefore I can break this other amendment and use this First Amendment to justify it. That's what the Ninth Amendment is saying. Certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So this would be if the Constitution had a clause, like apparently a lot of people think they do, that you have the right to not be offended. Let's say that was a thing.
Okay.
Let's say that was a thing. That would obviously infringe upon people's First Amendment rights. Therefore, per the Ninth Amendment, got to strike that one out, get it out of here, because it doesn't work.
What's funny to me is it might not even necessarily be First Amendment right, because you could exchange speech, I guess, for any kind of expression.
Sure. So
like someone even existing can be offensive to you.
That is accurate.
And we've seen that play out before.
Oh, yes. And it wasn't good for anybody.
No.
So, yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. The Ninth Amendment is essentially holding all of the others in place. So imagine, if you will, all of the other amendments being spaced out, and then enumeration, let's say they're blocks, right? And then enumeration kind of widens it a little bit, and then they start running into each other a little bit. So what the Ninth Amendment does is kind of cuts that overlap between them, and they're like, nope, all of these amendments are separate but equal, and they are not allowed to interfere with one another. So that kind of clamps down on people liberally interpreting different constitutional amendments. It puts the kibosh on that. That's not allowed. All of these different amendments have to work in harmony with one another without getting in the way of one another. And that's why the Ninth Amendment is so important. Now, first of all, do you have anything more to say on that? Dude, I'm just rolling through this. I apologize.
It's all good. It just makes me think of when people look at an issue or a law, and their understanding is, if I feel strongly enough about something, then that means it's right.
Right.
It's just so silly. It's so silly to me.
Of course it's silly. And, you know, when we talk about fairness and equality and all of these different things, and these are all obviously built into all of the Bill of Rights and a lot of amendments after the Bill of Rights. But as soon as you said, we feel so emotionally tied to something, or we feel very strongly about something, then all of a sudden all of that goes out the window. Or we want to interpret differently in a way that will fit our narrative. And that's just not how this works. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, it might have been yesterday, but I was listening to something that Shapiro was saying. The core tenet of it was a law, in order for it to be made, it needs to be reviewed over and over again to see if it can be equally applied to everyone. Because the minute that it is wielded by the powerful as a club, then it's not a law. anymore. That's tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me goes directly hand in hand with what I'm talking about. Some people interpret Constitution or local ordinances and laws as a club. Like, so I visited California
I'm so sorry.
a couple different times, and it's funny. It's like their whole reasoning for what I'm going to call petty laws is, to me, common knowledge for being decent as a human being. But also a lot of them are anti-fun. Like one of them was, you can't light firecrackers on the beach. There was a sign posted, and the interesting thing, I was going to say crazy, the interesting thing about Californian law, they have to list the exact byline of the law on the sign of where you can find it, which is nice, I guess.
I'm down with that.
Because it's like, where is this? It's right here.
Right. You can go look.
This is it.
Yeah, they're empowering the individual in that sense alone.
Right, but the idea that it's like, oh, well, it would be an inconvenience for a child or anyone to light firecrackers and throw it on the beach.
Right.
I'm not going to have a good time, therefore let's have a law that says you can't throw firecrackers on the beach.
It's like the nosy old lady down the street that's always looking out her window and like yelling at the neighborhood kids. We had one of those in my neighborhood growing up. I don't recall her name, but yeah, we did give her hell. Anyway. But it's kind of like that. Well.
But to me, that goes hand in hand with what you're saying. You know, the right to not be offended.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like they're trying to mitigate that pretty hard.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like basically, there shouldn't be any sort of like Puritan. You know.
It's just hardline.
Yeah.
It's just this is exactly
wagging, You know, like, oh well, you shouldn't do that because I said so. I don't like it, so no one should be allowed to do it. You know, there's that meme that it's a sign. It's a sign next to like a park or something, and it says you're not allowed to drive your vehicle through that intersection like more than 4 times in 6 hours, or just something really bizarre like that. And so, of course, the caption on the meme says, you know, well, if not for the government, who would stop someone from driving through here 4 times in 6 hours? Yeah. You know, it's why do we have all of this crap? What's the purpose of it?
I don't know. Someone got tired of someone going around and around in the roundabout, which is their legal right to do if they so choose.
There ought to be a law.
Maybe they're that indecisive, or they've got OCD and they didn't make the turn properly.
And you know what? Either way, it's their business. Leave them be.
A lot of this reminds me of the annoying, androgynous-looking white women that are just memes now. No,
like red and fish lips?
Not Big Red, but the woman that called.
There's just so many.
I know. Called the police on
with the glasses. And
the nice black family that was grilling in Oakland
and minding their own business.
You can't have a charcoal grill. And then the second that she's next to the police, she's just breaking down in tears because she's being oppressed. Pretty sure you were the one doing the oppressing.
It's just, well, I mean, it's oppression Olympics at this point. You know, who can claim the victim status in any given situation? And people like that go and seek it out.
Yeah.
Because they're sick. There's something wrong with it.
Something that's funny is I got a friend of my brother's, his old girlfriend, to admit that there is a hierarchy of oppression.
Yes, absolutely.
And I was like, okay, so answer me this. And I was like, this group, this group, this group, and laid it down like essentially the old food pyramid, which is a terrible model for diet. But she's like, no, that's exactly right. Yeah. And like we need to, be subservient to their needs. And it was like, it was my first steps into intersectional politics at that point, because the term, I hadn't heard it. Maybe it was coined years ago, but it was like, oh wow, like is that what that is?
Yeah,
it's like that doesn't make sense. So it's like talking to friends and they say, oh well, you are insert this demographic, identity politics, you cannot weigh in on issues for that person. And I think I was telling other people in Think Liberty about this. It's like, think think of the true advocates that can speak on transgender issues and homosexual issues. It's not a lot of people because of the percentage of, in relation to the percent of the whole of the United States. Like, only those people can talk about those issues.
Right.
So if we were to carry that forward, because it's something that I enjoy doing, that means that only if identity politics are the true core tenet of the ideologues, only those people can be in the Senate and Congress and pass laws.
Exactly. So Steven Crowder touched on
because we're going. I mean, that's
right,
if we carry it forward, that's the ideology.
Conclusion. Yes, to its logical conclusion. Well, you know, these people need to be artificially held up above other people, and no one else can represent or speak on their issues other than them. Great. Good luck getting your majority in Congress, getting those laws passed.
Yeah,
if only they can represent themselves, you know. Well, yeah, you want to talk about slavery or the civil rights movement or any of those things. Women's suffrage, who passed all of those?
All of them were elected officials that happened to be
primarily white men.
White men. I don't know if all of them were heterosexual or not, but
probably most of them.
Probably.
I mean, if the percentage of the U.S. in the U.S. population is reflected in Congress, even, you know, give or take quite a bit, yeah, the majority of them were probably straight white males. Yeah. Okay, so you're welcome, I guess. You know, so why are we adhering to all of these special rules and everything else when the entire point of
it's cultural tyranny. It's cultural tyranny.
Of course it is, and that's something that we need to fight back against. But especially with identity politics, that's like saying, well, you know, my doctor came in and told me that I have cancer.
Oh, okay. But she was a female, so therefore how can she say that you know, well, her opinion, I'm sorry,
she's never had cancer.
Yeah, she doesn't know.
How does she know?
I don't know.
She's not an expert.
That's true.
I guess I have cancer, so now I'm an expert in cancer. I don't need to listen to her for my treatment.
Sounds good to me.
That's how this works. You know, it's completely asinine, and we could just go all day on that kind of thing. But yeah, Steven Crowder had a great episode on that. I think it was probably about 20 minutes into one of his more recent episodes.
Yeah, I think I saw it too. It was good.
It was very good. You know, he's okay, taken to its logical conclusion. This is how this is going to look. You're not going to like it, and you are not going to get your way if you take it to its logical conclusion, as you said. Well, if these are the only people that can chime in on it or speak on it or vote on it or represent or whatever, you're not going to get any sort of reform passed that helps you and your marginalized or oppressed group.
Yeah, we can't have female professors teaching male students and vice versa. We can't have male OBGYNs because they've never self-identified as a woman.
Right.
They don't have the organs. So they're not allowed to have the cognitive ability to even learn about those issues and that biology. What gives them the right to feel like they can understand the female anatomy?
Well, I mean, plus talk about underselling or, I mean, insulting certain groups. Well, just because we have classified you as an oppressed group, then we need to help you because you obviously can't do it yourself. Yeah. How insulting is that? Yeah. It's disgusting. Well, we, the privileged this and that, we're going to reach down from on high and lift you up. Like, screw off, man. Nobody asked you for help.
That's why both of us subscribe to the thinking that the best thing we can do is get out of other people's way.
Yeah.
I don't. So you're saying I don't understand you? Yes. Okay. That might be true. Go on.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get in your way. I'm not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
That's
but
the best
service. we can't speak on all of that because we're speaking from a position of privilege, being straight white Christian males. That's amazing.
It's funny. That's amazing. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to my personal favorite amendment out of the Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment. And it is the shortest, but it is the most important. It says, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Well, I'll give you a second to let that marinate.
Yeah, go over it again, because I was thinking...
Oh, it's just so good. The amendment's so nice, you got to say it twice.
It's a pressure cooker.
The power is not delegated, well, the good thing we're not in Boston, to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Can you edit that part out?
I will.
That was in poor taste. So basically, this amendment is kind of bringing everything else to a close. So, as we've talked about, the theme throughout the Bill of Rights is that the entire point of each amendment is to preserve individual rights for the people against the government. It is to create a wall between the people and the government for the protection of the people against the government. So the 10th Amendment, in my mind, kind of puts all this into a nice little, ties it into a little bow.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on it?
Well, it sounds like enumerating the powers of the government. Is this relegating powers to the states?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's the federalist mentality versus, is it status? Is that the correct? Power to the individual states. Because I guess
anti-federalist versus federalist.
Okay, yeah. Because status is basically the same thing as a federalist.
Yeah, I mean, a statist is just someone who wants more government power.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
what it comes down to. That's just
good old Winston.
That's just a firebomb that we throw against non-libertarians or anarcho-capitalists throw against minarchists like me, because on their spectrum I'm technically a statist. Anyway,
which let's just talk about that for a minute.
We're talking about this off air. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it seems like folks on the left, or even centrists, left-leaning centrists, you've said before that they walk in lockstep. So there's power in that, obviously, and I think if you like those funny commercials about retirement where it's like, okay, walk as far as you can with the yarn that you've saved for your retirement. It's like an estimated distance. They're all walking together at a certain point, and then they stop where they stop because of in this illustration, their ideology. I think there's power in that because up until when they need to stop, they're unified. So I think, and you express the same thing, we need to walk together. We need to have a political conservative coalition, get what we need done for the American people. Because what I believe and my understanding of libertarian politics is that we are actually out for the betterment of society now and certainly in the long run. Right. Whereas other ideologies, other just thinking is self-serving because of the fatal conceit.
Right.
So let's walk together. Let's get done what we need done to help the American people. And then once we are where we are, then we can decide for the people that want to keep going.
Well, so on a macro level, when we're talking about politics and trying to accomplish the goals that we have in our particular movement, I think it's a shame and it's frustrating to me personally when I see good potential allies tossed to the side because they don't match up. They don't check every single box on our list ideologically. So conservatives and libertarians, tons of overlap there. But we shun them, and now there are like Trumpians, or what I want to coin is Trumpian justice warriors. TJWs, which, dear God, I want to cover that on a very upcoming episode of Liberty Bites, because it still pisses me off.
Or maybe a new show.
Or maybe a new show, which we're batting around. But damn it, Tom, I didn't want to give it away this early. So, yeah, I'm going to cover that. But so the Trump worshippers aside, and dear God, that's what they are. I swear they're about to put on robes and chant and cut up a goat.
Or togas. It seems like, Hail Caesar, Hail Caesar.
Gosh. Anyway, I don't want to get into that just yet. So those people aside, your actual conservatives that are pro-small government, regardless of who's in power, that is pro-free economics, regardless of who is in power, not knee-jerk reactionists, depending on emotion, just like social justice warriors.
Yeah.
Those conservatives, really the only difference between those conservatives and libertarians is social issues, for the most part. I know I'm speaking in generalities here, but I think that's pretty accurate to say.
Size of government's probably...
Size of government.
Big sticking point.
Yeah, I mean, you've got people like the Tea Party, groups like that's one of their focal points is minimizing the size of government. And those all fold within the conservative movement. So you got the conservatives and libertarians. You've got more splinter groups, people that might use different tactics but are ultimately pushing towards the same goal. If you're looking at it like a spectrum and you're going in the same direction, why not ally with those people? We're not saying merge together or become one single entity, but if y'all you're on the same path, why not travel together?
Yeah.
And if you get to their point before you get to yours, keep pushing after that.
Yeah.
So that's the macro perspective. But on a micro perspective, what we were talking about was ANCAPs and minarchists.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is, I'll confess, I've been hypocritical, guilty in terms of speaking with people on religion and saying, oh, well, this view of Christianity, so on and so forth, and going, back and forth with different people. I do agree. Let's get people talking about Jesus. Let's get people talking about religion. And then when we want to segment later on, and even on an individual basis. So yeah, that's what I did, was like talk to people on an individual basis. But there's been some gross me condescending to different sects of the belief. But it's like, let's just get people to where they need to be, and then we'll talk about fine details later.
Right, yeah. I mean, if we believe in the core principles of the religion, kind of the main bullet points, if you will, okay, let's get them there, let's get them to salvation, and then if we want to talk about sprinkling or dunking after the fact, but those aren't issues worth dividing over.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in politics. So to get back to this, what this is saying is that, so this comes historically from a compromise between Adams and Jefferson. So Jefferson was a Federalist, Adams was an anti-Federalist. And this is a split that really continues today. It's a lot less clear-cut today because, everything is just so muddled. At this point, our two main political parties are just two sides of the same authoritarian coin. But at the time, there were very, very heavy, heated political battles between these two camps. Even after Madison and Jefferson died, these ideologies continued to carry forward in the major parties for decades after that. So what this came down to was that Madison was very concerned about how the Constitution was going to be written in terms of the amendments. He didn't even want amendments in the Constitution.
Yeah, I remember talking about this.
Because his idea was that, well, if we put in there things that the government is not allowed to infringe upon, they are going to just infringe on everything else that's not in there. Because they're going to say, okay, these things are off the table, but if it's not mentioned, we can screw with it. And people being people and government being government, it's going to do it if you allow them that leeway.
So why was there even argument on the other side? Because obviously that's what happened.
Because Jefferson and his camp were in support of having a strong centralized government because they saw...
What was his fear? What was his dream, I guess, to be more optimistic?
I think his fear was factionalism. So before we had the Constitution...
What's wrong with that?
Well, it's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
But basically, the Constitution itself wasn't ratified until 1789. So what we had between the end of the Revolution and the ratification of the Constitution was the Articles of Confederation. And it's something that not a whole lot of people get into in their civics class. But basically, it was a very, very loose agreement between all of the colonies that, hey, we're all kind of going to do our own thing. But if we get invaded or anything like that, everyone has to help each other out. Kind of like, it's similar to NATO, right?
Okay.
So if one member of NATO is attacked, then all of the other members have an obligation to defend that member, et cetera, et cetera. It was very, it was similar in that particular sense, but it was a lot more loosely written. There was no central currency, there was no postal service, there was no central standing military. All of these different things, these sort of hallmarks of a sovereign nation.
So when he looked at that, did he like that?
No, Jefferson was not a fan of the Articles of Confederation. So he saw that as being far too weak. And so he said, okay, well, if we did get invaded, and let's say Virginia gets attacked, by the British or the French or the Spanish, any of the superpowers at the time, and then they call to,
further up north or south,
Maryland.
Yeah,
and hey, Maryland, we need troops, help protect us, and Maryland's like, no, I don't think so. Or we need taxes because there's a drought or a famine in this state, and we need to bring supplies to this state. No, I don't think so. We got our own problems. It's very easy to break. And so I think that was a valid fear, but personally, I think they went too far in giving the government too much wiggle room, with enumerated powers and these sorts of things. So that was his fear. I think we should have found something in between the two. But the compromise is what gave us the 10th Amendment, which, if we actually enforced it, would be by far the greatest weapon that we have against the growth of the federal government. So this is something that we've talked about extensively before, but basically the idea that the more you empower someone at the lowest level, then the better things are. So if you're going to talk about individual rights and liberties, then you have to bring those liberties down to the lowest level possible, to empower at the lowest level possible, I should say, not to minimize them,
sure,
but in fact to maximize them on an individual level. So that's why we have the federal, the state, the local, and then the individual citizen. So this is basically taking all of the stuff outside of Article 1 in the Constitution off of the table for the federal government. So they're saying, okay, federal government has to provide a standing army for the common defense. Actually, it doesn't even say standing army, but that's a whole other discussion. So there has to be a military for the common defense, a postal service, a mint, a judicial system, and of course Congress, the executive office, et cetera, et cetera. That's pretty much it. Those are the bare bones, the bare responsibilities that the federal government has, as outlined in the Constitution specifically. So this is Madison going in there and saying, okay guys, this is our safeguard. We're going to have amendments because that's the compromise, but I'm also going to throw this in there to protect from the federal government reaching out and saying, well, yeah, we're also going to do this and we're also going to do that. So if we actually enforced this and we took it as a literal interpretation, there would be no IRS. There would be no Bureau of Land Management. There would be no federal law enforcement, for that matter. There would be no FBI, DEA. There would be no CIA. There would be no NSA. All of these organizations are extra constitutional. Even the things like the Food and Drug Administration. All of those things, all of these services that they provide, can be provided on a state level. And by keeping that at a state level, as it is described in the 10th Amendment, that empowers the individual even further. Because now you're not forced into paying for all of those things regardless of where you live in the country. So California sets up their own version of the USDA or the FDA, and you got to pay for it. I don't want to pay for that, man. Scoot over the border. Go to Idaho or Utah or Nevada, one of the countries one of the states that are more conservative in that sense. They have less taxes. But if the people of California see a need for that and they want that, then they can do it. But maybe just keep that shit to yourself is the whole idea here. Don't force it on everyone else by pushing it through the federal government. And that's exactly what Madison wanted to protect us from. So again, if we actually enforced this thing, then, man, like 90% of what we see in the present day federal government would be gone. And that would trickle down in so many different ways, as far as how much we pay in taxes to the federal government, how much power the federal government has, how far the federal government can intrude on our lives as individuals, how much they can infringe on all of these other amendments that we've discussed. The 10th Amendment is so key, but it's also the most ignored out of all of the Bill of Rights.
Obviously.
And it frustrates the absolute hell out of me. I can't even right now, Tom.
Stop.
I can't even. No, seriously, dude. Imagine if you just swept away all of that crap that we have at the federal level, and you brought all of that down, as it says in the 10th Amendment. Bring it down to the state level, bring it down to the local level, bring it down to the individual's level. So that allows you as an individual to decide for yourself what you need and what you don't need. And that also empowers you as an individual to hold your local and your state politicians accountable because they work for you.
The simplest thing that I can relate this to on a consumer standpoint is what we were talking about bundled cable.
Sure.
So I have this theory that it's gonna horseshoe. So right now, okay, let's rewind to probably 10 years ago.
This is what we were talking about last night.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So everything was bundled. You had satellite or cable, whatever, which is, it's all satellite at this point. You paid for, in your words, 500 channels that you didn't use, and then 18 that you liked, that you did use. And then now it's all a la carte. It's all fragmented to whatever you want. And you've got entitlement people saying, oh, well, I don't want to pay $4 for Disney Channel.
Right. Well, that's what you were saying specifically. So Disney...
Yes. Oh, well, they have their streaming service now. They're not going to play any Marvel movies on Netflix because they have their own thing. People want it. They're going to pay money for it. So at a certain point, it's going to become so fragmented, and it's going to become more expensive than what it was with cable.
Sure.
So if people want to limit what they have, then they're going to buy what they want. There's going to be mass piracy because people want what they want. But there's going to be an public outcry for, oh, well, the government needs to get in, and I want this and this content, so we need to have it all together. And we're going to slowly horseshoe back to where we were. But what's ridiculous is there's going to be government intervention to say we need to go back to where we were before. It's like the same thing with the whole Bell South thing. I think it was all AT&T, and then they broke it up into the different bells. And then it was like, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, you can buy all those back up now if you want.
Right.
Like, so
make up your mind.
It's just like what I said before about Newtonian law, how different things carry over. It's like, from what people understand of the Big Bang, and then there's going to be the great contraction, because physics says if it slows down enough, gravitational forces are going to bring it all back together again. So eventually everything cable will be bundled back together. There'll be no more a la carte, or if it stays that way, it's going to be very expensive to get everything that you think that you want.
Well, it also depends on how the market plays out. So is it going to be natural, and market forces take their toll, or is the government going to step in because they've been given carte blanche by outcry?
It completely depends.
And that's exactly, that's going to be the deciding factor in that particular situation. So again, this comes down to, the federal government not, in fact, being prohibited from taking any rights that are not outlined for them as responsibilities in the Constitution itself. They are expressly prohibited from doing that. But a little over 200 years, after this was created, we're just all over the place with it. We've got all kinds of federal government BS and programs out there that we're being forced to pay for, that we're being forced to partake in, whether we want to or not. Like the Department of Education, for example, wasn't even a thing until the 70s, until our parents were young adults.
And let's look at the scores. Did they improve?
But our taxes went up. So that's why I can't tell you how much it drives me nuts that people, well, what's the 10th Amendment? Well, why is that important? Oh my gosh, kill yourself. Not really.
Not really.
But it.
And I'll be honest, I understand the principles, and I have an understanding. I don't know number by number what each one says. Quiz me now. I don't know. I don't know. But it's important, I know in high school, I think you carried around a pocket Constitution.
I was that kid.
Well, because you wanted to know.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, you get into a discussion with someone, they'd say, well, what are you going off of? And it's like, well, give me a second.
Right.
And you look it up, and that's important.
So it's important to understand these things, and that's exactly what this campaign is all about. I want to emphasize that we're just scratching the surface here. We're just going through the Bill of Rights, man. There is so much stuff. Even now, when I'm doing my political science classes, I'll go ahead and focus on this particular line of this article of the Constitution and tell me what you think it means. And I'll read it for the 20th time, and then I draw something new out of it. Like, oh my gosh, brought into a different light or from a different perspective, and you're going, this is so much more powerful than I thought it was before, if we actually enforced it.
Yeah, that's what's discouraging to me. To look at the 10th Amendment and say, if there were enough people in a region that said, no, we're not going to acquiesce to that.
Right.
We are going to go by the Constitution and enumerate your powers.
Right.
Because that's legally what we're allowed to say. And then what are they going to do? Like, oh, we're going to, that's an interesting scenario, which could legally play out.
Of course. Well, I mean, I'm a pessimist when it comes to this, just because I think the federal government is so big and it is so powerful.
Well, and the scenario I'm laying out is like snap of the finger instant. It wouldn't be that slow, and I've said that over and over again. So, like the creeping deregulation, which would be a beautiful thing.
Well, and we're seeing a bit of that under President Trump. Let's give him credit where credit is due. I mean, the man has been slashing all kinds of federal regulations. So that's his wheelhouse. He sees that there's too much, and he's cutting it drastically. And we're seeing the fruits of that as well.
Yeah, I saw an article that said it was either 700 or some large number of good things that have happened from his tax cut, and it was this company gave upwards of $1,000 bonuses to their workers, or a specific company from where we grew up increased their wages to $15 because of the money that they saved.
And they're doing it on their own.
Yeah. And we're not talking about a small amount of money. I mean, this particular company was like $2.3 billion that they're going to get to keep and then pass on to their workers.
And they're passing it on to the workers. They're expanding.
And build into their infrastructure and create more jobs. It's like, this is not that hard to figure out. But my understanding is when someone looks at a company and says, oh, I desire that, I want that, and therefore, since they have it, it's evil. But at the same time, it's like, okay, but let's assume that the people that are in the higher positions were you at one point. They didn't have knowledge or skills to get there. Maybe those people do. But they didn't have it. They worked their way through, and now they have it. So are they evil now?
Right.
And then if
you to begrudge them that,
let's remove you and then put you. Are you now evil?
Right.
It just logically doesn't make any sense to me.
It's not.
And I understand that. I know.
It's all based on emotion. That's why you got jackasses like Watch Lady and Bernie Sanders. The 1/10 of 1%. Talking about how these evil corporations. Like, what is evil about them? What is morally wrong about them? Because they're employing thousands of people and allowing them to provide for their families, giving them an opportunity to succeed and to broaden their personal experiences and educate themselves.
There have been issues. I mean, if we want to look at the textile industry or any kind of manufacturing where they made the air and the water polluted.
Right. I'm not saying they're all blameless, but on the whole, there's been far more good done through these evil corporations.
I think, I agree with what you're saying. The core understanding and principle of a company is to make money and support the people that support the company.
Right.
How is that evil? It's not. Are there instances where what they do is wrong? Yeah. So call them out for what it is and when they happen.
Hold them accountable for it, but that doesn't justify involving government regulation on a sweeping. This is what we called in the military one person shitting their pants and everyone wearing diapers. Like one person made a mistake, now everyone has to pay for it.
It was like elementary school punishment.
Yeah.
Oh, so-and-so kid. Yeah, group punishment is ridiculous to me. Because then everyone puts soap in a sock and then hits...
beats the crap out of you at night. I wonder how many of our audiences actually seen that movie.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, it's just insane. So if we had actually followed the 10th Amendment from beginning to modern day, if we didn't have presidents like Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, freaking LBJ, all of these Carter, all of these presidents, by the way, that are held in very high esteem by history. Man, you start digging into that, they were some dirty sons of bitches. All of them. They were looking for any opportunity they could to expand their personal office of president, set new precedents for their office and the federal government, ultimately to gain more power for themselves. And it's disgusting, and it's frightening to me that so many people don't know anything about it at all. They don't even know the 10th Amendment is a thing, much less that it needs to be followed. So when I see things like, President Trump rolling back a lot of these economic regulations, I'm like, man, it shouldn't have ever gotten there in the first place. But I'm glad that someone is doing something about it. For all of his faults, we need to praise him for doing those good things, and then still hold him accountable for the bad as well. But it shouldn't have gotten there in the first place. I'm glad to see someone finally doing something about it. But I would really like to see this change on an individual level as well. I would love to see someone be arrested for some BS law through an extra constitutional federal organization.
Oh, so it can get changed?
And then call them out on it. Well, Mr. So-and-so, what's your defense? Well, the 10th Amendment, Your Honor. What? How many heads would explode in that courtroom? How many people would have really confused looks on their faces too? And using that as leverage, using that to propel yourself to a level where not only are you defending yourself in whatever the court case is, but you're also showing everyone else like, hey, this is a thing. Remember that this is a thing. And we need to be using this as the pivot point for us to totally change the direction of this country and massively downsize the federal government. And in doing so, further empower the individual, give more sovereignty to the state level, which will in turn empower the individual, give more sovereignty to the local level, which will in turn empower the individual, give more sovereignty to the individual. That's the ultimate goal here. But now screw it, it's just an old piece of paper, right? Closing thoughts?
It's discouraging to see how far we've gone in one way. And I just want to go back to what I was saying about having a unified front and walking together and moving the country in a direction that actually benefits everyone. This is probably not kind, but it's like you see signs, whether it's at a zoo or in public or whatever, don't feed the animals. Well, why do you do that? Why is that sign there? Well, you're going to encourage a dependency ideology. If you keep feeding them, eventually their innate nature to go out and find food on their own is going to go away, and they're going to look for you or someone else to feed them. I don't personally believe 100% that evolution is how everything came to be. If that is how it was supposed to be, we're created and then we evolved, whatever. I don't think humanity did. I think we were just straight up pulled up out of the earth and formed. That being said, we have what people measure as animalistic behaviors. So if that carries over and we have an entitlement mentality to look to daddy government to receive benefit, that's your innate nature then at a certain point. When that is taken away, then you can get your animal instinct back to fight and provide for yourself. That is the truest benefit. That is kindness from a government standpoint. Culturally, there needs to be a Christian coalition, Jewish coalition, Taoist, Hindu, it doesn't matter. People that have altruistic tendencies in a non-government perspective to come together and help those that need education, need vocational training, need respect and help. That's where that should come from. And if we can all join together to roll back regulation, continue to do what we have done before, get out in local elections and vote, get rid of this mentality that progressive socialist ideology, democratic socialist ideology is the best thing for people in heavily urban areas or rural. Get rid of it. It's completely ridiculous. I was looking at, the results are still coming in for, I think it's Brent Welder in Kansas. He was campaigning with Bernie and Ocasio, Cortez.
Watch lady.
I hope he doesn't win, just because I can see it. They're wanting it to grow, you know, like some biological organism. Well, let's just plant it in the middle and then watch it go like that.
Right. Well, because every bit of growth that means we have shrinking individual sovereignty. We have shrinking power over ourselves. Which, I mean, if we don't have power over our own lives and are able to make our own decisions, what do we have?
I don't know.
Not much.
I think that's where we're going to close it, though.
I think it is. And what little we do have is we are beholden to the government for it. And that's exactly why we have the Bill of Rights. And we have all of the other amendments beyond that. You know, it's why the Founding Fathers had the foresight to see these problems happening again. And they put these measures in place. But it is ultimately going to come down to us as individuals to understand them and to enforce them. To take steps, to take measures to make sure that they are kept in place. Because ultimately, if we don't enforce them, it is just a piece of paper. If we forget about them, if we don't understand what they mean, it is just a piece of paper. It's up to us to do that, and that's what this entire campaign is about. God, I hate to end it on such a sober note. No, it honestly wasn't even intended. But that's, like I said, that's what this whole campaign comes down to. If you are watching this, then I sincerely hope that you're watching this and you feel emboldened, you feel empowered, because that's what this is supposed to be about. We want you to understand, and if we haven't gone over it, you know, thoroughly enough, please go do research on your own. Go talk to people that you trust to have the kind of knowledge base and to help you through it so you can understand these things better, because they're your birthrights. This Constitution holds within it all of the liberty that you have at birth. But if you don't exercise it, you will lose it. You will lose it. So go out there. You need to become involved. You need to educate yourself. You need to empower yourself and others to become more educated, to become inspired, to become involved. It's all cyclical. But if we don't do those things, then it's all going to go away, and there is no getting it back. So we need to understand our rights. We need to exercise our rights. We need to fight for our rights. I'm William Gaston with Think Liberty. Thank you, Thom, for joining us as always. It's been a great time. If you want to look more into what we represent and what we stand for, check out Think Liberty on all of the different social media sites. We also have our website at think-liberty.com. We've got podcasts, more videos, articles, the whole shebang. So be sure and check us out, and I hope you'll join us next time to become more liberty-centered with us.